What it do, YouTube? I am your boy Tony Vogue, the E-Boy Zombie Slayer, and I hope you've seen my video on the Dyatlov Pass incident. If you haven't, for chronological order's sake, I would suggest you watch that one first because the following reaction, the video does reference it heavily. For those of you that have seen it, bet you never thought that it could happen again. Well, let me blow your mind with a video from Nick Crowley covering the Khamar Daban incident. I got some milk and cookies here. Keep me warm and spook-free. Apparently the only survivor of this event was so scared that they couldn't speak. Unlike the Kholat Syakhl or Dyatlov Pass incident, they are one and the same. This one did have a survivor. Let's make it.
The Dyatlov Pass incident. A case that many consider to be one of the greatest mysteries of all time, as over 60 years later, there is no agreed upon conclusion to what exactly had happened to those hikers. And part of what has always drawn me to this mystery is its uniqueness, as I always thought nothing like it could ever happen again. But little did I know, it already has. It was August 9th, 1993, as a group of Ukrainian kayakers
this wasn't even that long
paddled
ago.
their way through a
I was
remote
born in
river
the 90s,
in southern
1990.
Siberia. The river tour would take them near the vast Khamar Daban mountain range and give them a full view of its beauty. As they followed the twisting river, the group would catch a glimpse of something moving in the woods. It was a young lady wandering aimlessly with a frozen expression on her face. She was all alone with blood on her jacket. The kayakers would call out to her, asking who she was.
What would your first thoughts be if you saw that in the wilderness? Like, geez, just a woman covered in blood, walking alone. Kind of run the other way.
And if she needed help, but the girl didn't answer. In fact, she didn't say a word. Whatever she had seen on that mountain range had traumatized her.
I think that got even creepier.
To the point where she couldn't speak, having barely spoken of the incident to this day. The kayakers would bring her back to civilization, where it would be discovered that her name was Valentina Yudachenko, a hiker who had been visiting the area as part of a tourist expedition through the mountain range. But the concerning part was, she wasn't alone. Or at least she hadn't been when she started her hike. In fact, she had been with 6 other hikers during her trip.
I thought the
Hikers
video
who
meant
were
her
nowhere
hike
to be
off the
found.
mountain.
What happened in those mountains that was so traumatic that it left Valentina in a state of shock for years?
Note to self, if I ever go to Russia, stay away from the mountain.
And caused the disappearance of her entire crew. Well, the story is as strange and disturbing as it gets. It all started on August 2nd, 1993, 7 days before Valentina would be found lost in the woods. A group of 7 hikers had set out on a tourist expedition through the Siberian mountain range of Khamar Daban. The group consisted of 24-year-old Tatiana Filipenko, 23-year-old Alexander Kresin, as well as Denis Shvachin, Victoria Zalasova, Tamar Bapanov, and of course, Valentina Yudachenko, each of whom were merely teenagers. But despite their youth, they were all well-trained and experienced hikers, and the group was led by 41-year-old Ludmila Korovina, an internationally renowned master in pedestrian tourism with immense knowledge of the area. They were a well-prepared and run group, and the Khamar Daban mountains were not viewed as being dangerous, especially in the middle of summer. The general area was a popular...
So this is unlike the Kholat Syakhl mountains, which was literally Mountain of the Dead, so they didn't mess this part up. They didn't go to a mountain that was literally called Mountain of the Dead or something. Good stuff.
Tourist attraction. And when Ludmila's crew set out on the morning of August 2nd 2 other groups would follow on nearby trails, one of which was even led by Ludmila's 16-year-old daughter, Natalia. The two would plan on meeting up the very next day in the mountains along with their respective crews, before Ludmila and company would continue on towards Ludyanka, their final destination. And luckily for them, the weather forecast had predicted clear skies for the majority of the trek, making the conditions perfect for a hike. However, the forecast couldn't have been more wrong.
Oh shit.
On and off spouts of freezing rain poured down upon the group, and predicted an oncoming snowstorm as the group climbed the Kanulu mountain. And by August 4th, the snowstorm was in full effect, pummeling the exhausted hikers and forcing them to reroute and miss their connection with Natalia's group. Drained of energy, Ludmila would make the call to set up camp near the top of a clear summit and rest for the night. A move that to this day is still questioned, as the hikers were merely half an hour away from a shelter that stood on top of that very mountain. But nevertheless, they would spend the night there, and they waited for the morning. The sun would rise the next day to more stormy weather, with the snow continuing to fall around them. Ludmila knew that staying where they were would only spell trouble, so she ordered the group down the mountain and into the cover of the woods below. They'd never make it there. Just minutes into their descent, Alexander Kristen would begin to stumble. The man considered to be the strongest of the group would fall to the ground as his mouth began to fill with foam.
What?
Blood would rush out of his ears and his nose as he lay.
His mouth would fill up with foam. Blood would rush out of his ears. Like, that escalated quickly.
There, seizing violently in front of his group. The hikers stood there stunned. Creason was in perfect health, and just minutes ago he was fine. And now...
Okay, I have a new theory that Russia tests their weapons in the mountains. And I am staying the fuck away. Don't go to the mountains in Russia.
He laid in front of them, dying. They had been outside for mere minutes, and already one of their crew members were down. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Ludmila knew that they had to react quickly, so she volunteered to stay behind with Alexander and appointed the 2 remaining boys, Dennis and Tamar, to lead the rest of the group on their descent to the forest. And so, the 5 hikers continued moving forward without their leader and their strongest member, trudging ahead in a state of shock and confusion. However, this descent wouldn't last long.
Why the hell would you leave your strongest member behind? And that would be Ludmila. And why would she send them off alone?
As they walked out of sight of Ludmila and their dying friend, screams started ringing out from on top of the hill. It was Ludmila. They rushed back up to see what was the matter, only to find a disturbing scene. Alexander was lying there, dead, and Ludmila was dying too, unable to move and on her last breath. To this day,
what the hell happened?
It's still unclear what she died from, with reports saying that she had suffered from the same mysterious illness that Alexander seemed to have, while others say that it may have
biological or chemical weapon.
Just been a heart attack. But either way, chaos erupted from the group. Both Victoria and Tamar would quickly collapse on the ground, twitching violently and bleeding the same way that Creason had.
What in the world? This is far, far beyond Politziato.
They began tearing at their clothes, ripping them off and grabbing their necks as if they were being choked, all the whilst they desperately tried to gasp for air. Valentina rushed to help Victoria.
If you remember, the Politziato gang was adequately underdressed for, not adequately dressed for their surroundings. Some of them were found in, like, just underwear. Like, they cut the tent and ran.
Victoria, but in an instant, the suffering girl would sink her teeth into Valentina, biting her and forcing her to back off.
What? She turned into a cannibal. Holy crap. This reaction.
While this happened, Dennis started to run away from the group out of fear and confusion, having no idea what was happening to his friends or why. He could only watch as, one by one, they began to lose their minds and their lives. With Dennis hiding from the group, Tatiana also began to tear her warm clothing off, exposing her body to the freezing cold elements. She too grabbed for her throat and acted as if her own body was torturing her. Once on the ground, she would turn her attention to the rock that laid next to her, and in an instant she would begin to smash her head against it, over and over again.
Bruh. That is some shit right there.
Until her body would go limp. In a matter of what must have felt like minutes, the group of 7 had withered down to just 2, as the suffering hikers had stopped moving altogether, likely having succumbed to their mysterious symptoms. Dennis would emerge to help Valentina, as the 2 were the only ones left who hadn't faltered. However, their health was starting to wither as well. They remained in the forest, close to the site where their whole group had just died, unsure of what to do next. And I can't imagine the silence and the confusion they must have been experiencing as they stood there together after witnessing all their friends drop dead in front of them. Friends that a mere hour ago were in perfect health. And the stark fate wasn't quite finished with the group either, as a short time later, Dennis would collapse alongside Valentina, as he too began bleeding profusely, leaving Valentina as the only living member of the group. Completely traumatized and scared.
Yeah, like, you would be traumatized too, but that was quick.
For her life, Valentina took supplies from the camp and proceeded to wander alone in the forest. She did so for 3 days before being found by the kayakers on August 9th.
Остальным дала команду спускаться вниз, но почти сразу остановила группу и попросила подняться за ней кого-нибудь. Таня достала тент, и остальные накрылись им. Я поднялась к Коровиной, глаза у Саши были огромные.
It would be 3 weeks before the bodies were discovered, as they received no guidance from the deeply traumatized Valentina. And what the rescue party saw when they stumbled upon the scene would shake them to their core. With one member saying it was a scary picture, the hikers were lying on a small ledge, some huddled together, some a little distance away. They had no eyes. In the empty sockets and parted mouths, worms were crawling.
God damn.
It's a story that seemingly makes no sense. 6 healthy people turning insane and dropping dead in the matter of minutes, which prompts the all-important question, what happened to those hikers? A question that to this day remains without a true answer. A few of the hikers' bodies would be flown into the Siberian city of Yuli, where autopsy reports ruled that the 6 hikers had died of hypothermia and protein deficiency, pointing to the idea that the group had not been eating enough throughout their trip. But the more I look into this, the less I believe that this is possible. Just looking over the symptoms, this cause of death does explain some of their behaviors, such as the paradoxical undressing. However, it fails to explain them all. The biting, the banging of their heads against rocks, the foaming of the mouth, and the bleeding are all inconsistent with this conclusion. In addition, I find it strange that the hikers had perished a mere minutes into their hike. They had only been outside and exposed to the elements for a short period of time, and they all had had a long warm night's rest in their tents. So how could hypothermia have set in so quickly? After all, it was summertime, and despite the snow, the temperature was likely barely below freezing. Also, if hypothermia were truly to blame, and they were in such bad shape that each hiker died in the span of minutes, then how could Valentina have continued to survive for 3 more days? It just doesn't make sense. And as for the protein deficiency, Valentina herself had mentioned that the group had eaten well throughout their trip, and had even ate together on the morning of their deaths. It's also worth noting that they ate as a group together, with each member eating the same thing. So how had Valentina survived if she had eaten what they had eaten? And has caused myself and many others to doubt this theory. But if it wasn't hypothermia and protein deficiency, then what could it have been?
I mean, one could become
As is the case with most mysteries, some have blamed the supernatural, believing that something otherworldly had happened to the group, while others have taken a more scientific stance.
I mean, at this point, it's easy to hypothesize, you know, aliens or Yeti men or something, because this is absurd, and the symptoms that they displayed were truly terrifying.
Blaming things like low frequency in the area, which caused the group to go in a panic. But I have a hard time believing either of these, as the area was not all that remote, and it's well studied by scientists. Plus, this doesn't line up with Valentina's testimony, as well as the conditions of their bodies. Another possibility is that the group had eaten something poisonous on their trip, an idea that is certainly possible, as Ludmilla was often known to be a forager. So perhaps she had picked some sort of fungus or berry, giving it to the group to eat, without realizing that it was actually toxic. A poisonous mushroom could certainly cause the hikers to hallucinate and potentially bleed internally. But the issue is, Valentina never mentioned that the group had foraged for food, and she is on record saying that they had eaten well. If they had ate something suspicious out there, she certainly would have told authorities. Plus, if they had all eaten together, then how had Valentina not been poisoned? And finally, Ludmilla was an expert at this kind of stuff, so it's unlikely that she would make a mistake of this magnitude, especially given how well she knew the area. But if it hadn't been the food that had poisoned them, then perhaps it was something in the air. Russia has long since been known for their development of deadly chemical weapons, producing them in secret and testing them in undisclosed locations. And around this time, it's documented that they had a specific interest in deadly nerve agents, chemicals that could have
that seems like a deadly nerve agent right there.
Caused the hikers to snap and act the way they did, as well as causing their bleeding and foaming of the mouth. Because of this, many think it's possible that the Russians had been testing or even dumping their chemicals in the area where the hikers just happened to be. After all, in 1993, the Soviet Union was already disbanded, an event that caused thousands of these chemical weapons to go missing, likely being sold or dumped. And just looking at the way the hikers had died, it seems like the best possibility for explaining how it happened so quickly. Now, following this theory even more, the case gained virtually no media coverage, besides for a single
The cover-up, eh? The old cover-up.
Local article, and it's barely known to this day, pushing some to believe that it could have been covered up. And there's also one final key detail that I found in my research that could point to this theory being true. After authorities were alerted that a group of tourists were missing, they didn't set out a search party until a full week had gone by, despite
They didn't send out a search party for a week?
there being clear weather. Some online have taken this as an indication that authorities were waiting for the toxins in the area to clear before beginning their search. But there are some issues. First of all, the location where the hikers were visiting was fairly popular, and they were a mere 100 meters away from a shelter that was designed for people to stay in. So why would the military test or dump weapons there? Wouldn't they select a more remote area? And also, how had Valentina survived? If there truly was a deadly chemical in the air there that was so powerful that it killed every member of the group that quickly, then it's nearly impossible that Valentina would have survived. And because of that, I can't settle on this as a definite conclusion. It's a frustrating case as the answer seems so hard to settle on, potentially because it's been incredibly underreported, and the reports that are out there are filled with quite a bit of speculation rather than fact. Also, of the original articles written on this, many were made in other languages, which may have led to things being lost in translation over the years. And though Valentina's testimony tells us what had happened on those mountains, it's also possible she had misremembered things, especially given the extreme shock and trauma she had experienced. She had also just recently started discussing this event, leaving things to be forgotten over the years. So with all these factors, it's possible we may not even have the full story, which just adds more mystery to this strange case. And given the lack of
What a mess, man.
attention it's received, it's possible we may never know for sure what happened in those
I
mountains.
think, honestly, I gotta go with Russian
I want to give a huge thank you to
chemical
my
weapons.
gold tier.
Now, whether they were dumped or tested, I'm not sure. And Valentina must have just stayed upwind, the rest didn't. But the Dyatlov Pass incident and this are two reasons that I want to stay away from the Russian mountains. For a hike, for camping, hell, for any reason. Till next time, it's your boy Tony Vogue, the E-Boy, Zombie Slayer.